It's been 1 week since news broke of the death of Pope Francis. Now laid to rest following his funeral on Saturday, the first pontiff from the global south has been eulogized as a pope among the people, with an open heart towards everyone. His funeral mass brought together hundreds of thousands of mourners, ranging from refugees to royals. Indeed, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, is a saying for a time like this. But importantly, there are questions that hang over the future of the Catholic Church. The most important among them is who will be chosen to lead it next. From the historic Vatican City, Arise News international correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya reports.
From the pilgrims to the powerful, the refugees and the royals, some 400,000 people came together to mourn the death of Pope Francis. Applause, the only sound heard, as 88 years of life was carried in a single wooden coffin out of the Vatican's St. Peter's Basilica. The remains of a man who sought to build bridges and not walls.
Pope Francis truly shared the anxieties, sufferings and hopes of this time of globalization. He gave of himself by comforting and encouraging us with a message capable of reaching people's hearts in a direct and immediate way.
It's no secret the Pope wanted peace. Perhaps this was a fitting parting gift. In the moments before the funeral began, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sat face-to-face with US President Donald Trump for the first time since their fiery argument in the Oval Office in February. Their 15-minute talk assembled to some as an answered prayer. And what better setting than this historic church? As the service ended, Pope Francis began his journey to his final resting place. Thousands lined the streets of Rome to pay their last respects. His body brought into St. Mary Maggiore Basilica in Rome ahead of a private burial. But back at the grounds of the Vatican, the Pope's international reach is undeniable.
During his papacy, that spanned over a little over 12 years, he identified with the poor, with the marginalized, with the underserved, with the sick, with the beggars, the immigrants, the homeless. In fact, he's a man of his words in every aspect of it.
Personally, I feel inspired to come to pay homage to a pope who is deeply a pastor. You see his pontificacy characterized with this golden tapestry of mercy.
Pope Francis is also very important for me as a Congolese because he talks a lot about Congo, the war in Congo, and recently, about 2 years ago, he visited Congo, Kinshasa. So for it, I feel that he is very close to me.
When I say people of God, not only Catholics, you have the Buddhists here today, you have the Muslims here today, we have the Greek extraction here, you have the Oriental world, you have the North and Latin America, and more importantly, we have the entire Africa, we have Nigeria. It's so beautiful, this is a unifying personality, and then we're going to miss him,
Being here has been such a blessing. We, as you know, like everybody else, we had planned to come here for the canonization, but we make plans. God orders the steps. We are here, divine appointment, to see such humble men go with so much respect. I just feel so blessed.
It's a beautiful thing to also experience this one may say, one in a lifetime experience to be in St. Peter's Plaza at the funeral of our very dear Holy Father Pope Francis. And it's also a beautiful thing because he is a Pope of mercy. He is a Pope of what the Italians would call the periferia, the periphery. He used to always preach for those who are outside the walls, and also advise the priests to smell like the sheep that they are shepherding.
The reign of Pope Francis is now over, and in the coming days, a papal conclave must be held in order to choose his successor. But the question is who? Which man will emerge from that balcony dressed in papal regalia, addressing the crowds right here in St. Peter's Square? We'll find out together. Adefemi Akinsoya, Arise News, Vatican City.
Joining us now from Vatican City for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsoya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Rubin. Good morning, Vimbai. I hope you're all doing well.
Good morning.
Let me tell you what is happening around the world. Thank you so much. Well, as we just heard in that package there, we do know that, of course, Pope Francis was laid to rest on Saturday. But on Sunday, once again, the grounds of St. Peter's Basilica, which is where we're stood now, was filled with crowds of people, tens of thousands, close to 100,000. You can even hear some singing now as more parishioners continue their journey towards the Basilica itself. But on Sunday's Mass was held by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the Secretary of State of the Vatican, and in some circles, to some people, is believed to be the forerunner, the front runner when it comes to who will be the next pope. Now, this is very, very interesting because, as I said, over the weekend, Pope Francis was, of course, laid to rest at St. Mary Major's Basilica in mainland Rome, and you do see pictures of a very, very simple tombstone. It just has white marble across of it, his name, Franciscus, in Latin, written across it. There's a single white rose, and it's illuminated by one light bulb, just highlighting the simplicity and really the beauty of his final resting place, which is in line with what he wanted. But again, coming back to really the future of the Catholic Church as it stands now, the formal mourning period begins. It's expected to last some 9 days, and then thereafter the papal conclave is supposed to come together and really start the business of electing, deciding who the next pope is going to be. This is going to be quite an interesting process, and it's one that may start a little sooner than initially planned for. So it's likely, it is possible rather, that from around May 4th to May 5th, perhaps even May 6th, that this conclave will begin, but it must actually start by May 10th, just in terms of keeping with traditions, especially after the formal 9-day mourning period is over. Now, going back to the cardinals who are going to be making this decision, all of them, as a direct extension of Pope Francis's wishes, are going to be, of course, under the age of 80. The vast majority of them are 60. Now, 8 out of 10 of these cardinals were actually selected by Pope Francis himself, which means to some critics that perhaps a lot of them may have a level of loyalty towards Pope Francis and could be believed to be picking a pope that would be closer to his image. That being said, there was also the conversation about age, and that is another example of the reform that Pope Francis did bring during his papacy, which is again quite interesting. So looking at age, when we're looking at these cardinals, 20 of them were actually brought into the fold in December, so very, very recently, and they were also considerably young, among them a 44-year-old. So again, to people who are more staunchly conservative, they believe that these new cardinals are examples of Pope Francis trying to have some control over who his eventual successor will be, but we don't know who that's going to be. Eventually, they will let us know, and we will be able to find that out through the tradition of smoke pluming from the sky of the Sistine Chapel and, of course, St. Peter's Basilica itself. When we see that smoke, we do know that eventually now the cardinals have been able to go through this rigorous round of voting, because they vote 4 times a day until one candidate has been able to secure a 2/3 majority. And once we see the smoke in the air pluming through the sky of Vatican City, then we know a new pope has been selected. So a lot of anticipation. That is what a lot of people are still here waiting for. You'll know also that this Easter period also came at the time of the Jubilee, the 2025 Jubilee. So a lot of tourists were here for that. obviously unaware that the Pope was going to die. So it's been a very historic few days for many reasons. So that's what we're seeing now. In the package, we also saw a snippet of a conversation between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump. They sat within the confines of St. Peter's Basilica, sat face to face and had a 15-minute conversation, which both parties have said was productive, was a good example of diplomacy and conversations, especially since the last time the two gentlemen were in close proximity to each other at the Oval Office back in February. It was quite a fiery exchange. So it was quite nice to see a peaceful conversation, if you can call it that. Now, off the back of that, on his way back to the United States, while addressing American journalists, Donald Trump was asked about that conversation, what we can expect, whether or not he believes that Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to concede Crimea, which was illegally annexed by Russia, as part of its effort to move towards peace. And Donald Trump responded to those journalists saying he thinks so, that he thinks Volodymyr Zelensky is ready to give up Crimea. But that's not true. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian officials have said repeatedly that Crimea is just not up for discussion. Even if it were up for discussion, it's a situation that would need a referendum. As it stands now, Volodymyr Zelensky does not have the mandate to make such a decision. So that point of conceding the annexation of Crimea is just not something that is possible at this time. We do know that the Russian forces did take control of Crimea over in 2014, and since then they have continued to hold control over this Ukrainian territory. So we'll have to keep our eyes and ears open as to what peace in Ukraine is going to look like, especially with this deal on the table. Clearly, Donald Trump is anticipating and quite anxious to get some form of peace signed and agreed by both parties. But it does seem as though that possibility may be slipping through his fingers. And then finally, if we go over to Canada, Vancouver, unfortunately, is reeling after an attack on people. A 30-year-old man has been charged now with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder after driving his vehicle into a crowd of people, most of them Filipino worshippers who were celebrating a cultural day. This is happening just moments before Canada goes to the polls to elect its next leader. And from both sides, whether it is the leadership of Mark Carney and the Liberals to Pierre Poilievre, who is talking about how this is really another example of how Canada needs to shift away from Liberals and focus on a new type of leadership. It is interesting to see what bearing this attack, which is actually being confirmed by Canadian authorities as not being a form of terrorism, in the sense that the Filipino community was targeted specifically, but it is also definitely an example of the lack of security in the country and something that many voters are going to be having in the front of their mind when they cast their ballot. So those are your stories from across the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts before we go over to the newspapers.
All right, Adefemi, honestly, such an honor for you to have been able to observe such a historic moment in history with, so up close and personal. So I'm very jealous from the studio here, but fantastic coverage, Adefemi. What were some of the things that stood out? Besides the simplicity of it, of course, it was a grand ceremony as expected, but just the simple details which reflected his choice for humility and to just keep things as basic as possible. I think that really did, it shined through in the ceremony. Of course, there was controversy about suits. I'm not sure if that got to you where you were. The world broke out into a debate about the appropriate suit color that one should wear to such an occasion. Of course, the dress code from the Vatican had said dark suits for gentlemen. And we know that Donald Trump and Prince William both came wearing lighter shades of blue. So what was that inappropriate and how was that? Well, those are side conversations. Of course, we saw when Zelensky walked in, the amount of applause and cheering that he got, which just broke from sort of the somber nature of the event. And of course, that was just shortly after we'd seen that iconic picture of him and Donald Trump in negotiations. Now, what we've seen following that, of course, is we've seen some protests breaking out in France and Germany because those countries are asking for an end to the war. In essence, the citizens who are protesting in Berlin, I believe there are also protests in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, are saying that they don't want their countries to contribute anymore to this war. So I just hope that all of this global pressure comes together. Although more pressure is going to Zelensky than to Putin, I hope some people can also start putting some pressure on Vladimir Putin so that this war can come to an end.
Okay, let's start with the Pope. The Pope, who is the Pope who won the hearts of all people because he was the Pope of peace, as the Camelendro pointed out. This was a Pope who tried to build bridges, not walls. And this was a Pope who touched minds and hearts. And we saw that on display with 400,000 people, including royals and others, from refugees to ordinary people to royalty, attending his burial. 250,000 alone gathering at the St. Peter's Basilica. But the major point that came out of this was about his humility, his simplicity. He was buried in a wooden casket, and the first pope to be buried outside the St. Peter's Basilica. He was buried as a Santa Maria Maggiore, which again is important. Now, what follows next? The Novendi House, 9 days of mourning, everyday mass in every Catholic church around the world. And now, within the next 15 to 20 days, the College of Cardinals will convene. During that period, the College of Cardinals, the members, 252 of them, 135 of them are eligible. Now, they will meet, they will vote. The Pope that will emerge will have to win 2/3 of the votes. It's a democratic process. In fact, if nobody gets the 2/3 after rounds of voting and all of that, there will be a runoff. But we will have a Pope, and there will be a white smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel, and all Catholics all over the world will say, Habemus Papam. We have a Pope. The prayer of the Church is that the next Pope that would emerge will be a Pope that will unite people, will be a Pope that will talk about peace, will be a Pope that will talk about hope. The second issue that you brought up is the Jubilee, the opening of the door. They have a door in the Vatican that is only open 4 doors of the 4 major basilicas, including the Santa Maria Maggiore. They open it only once in 25 years. And when this same Pope, Pope Francis, issued the what do they call it now, encyclica, or Papa Bull, they call it, last year, he was talking about hope, pilgrims' hope for pilgrims. And so, he has died at a time when major significance, at the end of the Holy Week, and also at a moment when the Jubilee door at the Vatican basilicas, 4 of them, will be opened again. And then significantly, that meeting between Zelensky and President Trump. Again, the 2 of them talking about peace in the world. It was not only President Trump that Zelensky met. He also met with President Macron. He also met, with Sir Keir Starmer. So on the occasion of the burial of the Pope, Francis, there were discussions about peace. Isn't this significant? There was also the participation of the Eastern Orthodox Church that are separated from the main church since 1054. But they were there, and they were also given a role, emphasizing the point about building bridges, not walls. However, Trump has gone ahead to report the outcome of the meeting, to say, he thinks that Zelensky will hand over Crimea to Russia. Well, that's not so straightforward. That's President Trump's version. I quoted Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution. Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution under martial law, does not give powers to the government or the president to cede territory. That is what that constitution says. So it's beyond Zelensky. And in any case, Ukraine has been consistent in saying we are not going to cede Crimea with all the emotions involved. Now, Europe is not on the side of Trump. The German defense minister is saying it will be an act of capitulation for Zelensky to cede Crimea or the other 3 territories, including Luhansk, that has been taken over by Vladimir Putin. So we have not seen the end of it yet, but Trump wants to solve all of this within 2 weeks. He said 24 hours, now it's 2 weeks. Will he be able to do it? Marco Rubio says if they can't do it, they will walk away. Yeah, America will walk away. Very hypocritical in this matter. After all, they have taken over Zaporizhzhia, where they want to control the nuclear sites. 2, they say they are going to control the rare earth materials, natural resources of Ukraine. The Ukraine has already signed a memorandum of intent. But on the other issues, the matter is not settled yet. And Keir Starmer, your prime minister, Britain, you are British Nigeria, is saying that Ukraine must have a voice in the room. So these are the issues. Well, for lack of time, I don't want to go through all the 7 points that they were negotiating last Wednesday in London. Agreed. As for the incident in Canada, very tragic, very unfortunate. The Lupa Lupa Festival in Vancouver, very unfortunate that somebody will just drive and kill so many people. Almost on the eve of the Canadian election. Canada goes to the election, general election on April 28. And it's unfortunate that this has happened. And the politicians are piggybacking on this, all expressing condolences. But very tragic. We commiserate with the affected Filipino community in Vancouver.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rubin. And of course, thank you to you, Yvonne Bai, for always both excellent submissions to the World Brief. Let's move on to the newspapers this morning. And let's take a look at the front page of This Day. We have touched on this already at the beginning of the show, but this is definitely the story that is dominating Nigerian news and permeating around the world. So This Day does lead this morning with the presidency denying claims of Nigeria becoming a one-party state and insisting that democracy is not under threat. This is, of course, against the backdrop of a growing number of defections from Nigeria's opposition party, the People's Democratic Party, to the ruling All Progressives Congress. Now, the presidency says that democracy is in fact becoming stronger under Tinubu's multi-party ideology. Now, also to the top of This Day this morning, we have Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu telling the 2023 presidential aspirant Peter Obi that he lacks the moral right to criticize Nigeria's federal government. So very, very staunchly harsh words coming from the Lagos State Governor towards Peter Obi. Now, moving on to the New Telegraph this morning, it does lead with Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry saying that the revenue targets imposed on federal government agencies are really putting investments in a chokehold and is disrupting projections in the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is pushing firms out of Nigeria. The Punch weighs in on this defections issue with its headline, PDP calls emergency meeting to halt Hurricane Tinubu. It's also a story that is picked up on the front page of today's Inquirer. Let's take a look at the front page of the Vanguard this morning. And in response to the earlier headlines, we do have President Tinubu telling the opposition not to blame him for their inability to manage their own party affairs. Of course, this is happening as Sharif Oborevwori and Omo Agege, both of them are reportedly in some form of a battle for the leadership of the Delta State faction of the APC, with, of course, the Delta State governor just recently joining the APC fold. Now, if we take a look at the front page of The Guardian, it takes a slightly different story. It steps away from this talk about defection and is looking at solar panel energy, which is something that we've discussed on the morning show quite a few times last week. But essentially, it's taking a snapshot of Nigeria's current solar industry, which includes installation costs. And now, one of the installation costs, if you're looking at the average household, it would cost in excess of 6 million naira. That is, of course, as its headline says, that a solar import ban could trigger a 150% price surge and worsen
this energy crisis that Nigeria is currently going through. Those are your papers in Nigeria. I'm Adefemi Akinsoya, stood on the grounds of St. Peter's Square in front of St. Peter's Basilica. Love to hear your thoughts if we've got the time.
Unfortunately, Adefemi, we don't have the time, but please do say a prayer for us all while you're there. Say a prayer for the nation as well.
Always.
All right. Thanks so much, Adefemi.